The release of Dissidia Final Fantasy NT is fast approaching, and I can feel the excitement starting to build within the community. It seems like only yesterday that it was announced at E3, but here we are with the game releasing next month in both Japan and in the West. And with Square Enix releasing a ton of trailers recently, the level of anticipation is just growing and growing. At this point, the final roster is pretty much confirmed, as the original arcade roster from back in 2015 has been supplemented with numerous characters. Many of these were present in the original Dissidia all the way back to the PlayStation Portable, but there have now been some new characters added to the roster that we've never seen before. We can now play as Ramza from Final Fantasy Tactics, but they've also added in Y'shtola from Final Fantasy XIV, Ace from Final Fantasy Type 0, and more recently, they announced that Noctis from Final Fantasy XV would be joining the fray. But what about after the game launches? Well, they announced back in August that Dissidia NT, as has now become customary for fighting games, would be receiving a Season Pass that will contain additional characters. For now, they've announced that the Season Pass will contain 6 characters, and whether it's related or not, they recently said that post-launch, the roster will be expanded to include all characters from the original Dissidia games. It means we'll likely see characters like Judge Gabranth, Tifa Lockhart, and Laguna Loire added as a priority, but I feel as though there's so much more room for growth outside of this. There are other characters who I feel should be included on the basis that they'd offer much more interesting gameplay, or because of the fact that they're just awesome characters who genuinely deserve to be featured in an anniversary tribute game. Either way, as we know there are going to be 6 DLC characters, I decided to pick out 6 characters I'd love for them to add to the game in the future. And to keep things fair for both Materia and Spiritus, I've picked out 3 protagonists and 3 antagonists. It meant I had to get quite selective with my list, as this is from the entire franchise, not just the main series, and there are a ton of characters I could easily have picked, but we are where we are. So on that note, here are 6 characters we must see in Dissidia NT, or else. And I'm going to start my list off with Zack Fair. Now I think it's safe to say that in the original story of Final Fantasy VII, even though Zack Fair was pretty important to the development of Cloud as a character, he ultimately had a bit part role to play, but that all changed with the release of Crisis Core on the PSP back in 2007. Appearing as the main protagonist, Zack was instantly thrust into the spotlight, and his positive attitude and impressive skills, as well as the heartbreaking final moments of the game, cemented him within the fanbase as an extremely popular and likeable character. It therefore means, in my opinion at least, that if they're wanting to keep attention and interest on Dissidia NT post-launch, announcing Zack Fair could be the perfect remedy, especially for Japan, where after a poll within Square Enix members for the 25th anniversary celebrations, Zack was crowned as their most favourite character, ahead of Cloud Strife. It's something that was also alluded to in a recent Q&A where Hazama and Kujiroka were asked flat out whether they'd be adding Zack into the game. Yes, you could argue that his playstyle would be similar to Cloud's, as they would both likely wield the Buster Sword, but I'd instead like to think of this as a creative challenge for the developers to solve. And that's what games like Dissidia should be all about, allowing us to explore the different combat styles of our favourite characters. Failing that, I guess there's always the prospect of Zack appearing as an alternative costume for Cloud, as we've seen with Ultima Seer and Adia, but I just don't think that would have quite the same impact. Next on our list is Caius Ballad, who of course appeared as the main antagonist in Final Fantasy XIII Part 2 before appearing again in Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII in a lesser role. I think we can all agree that after the disappointing showing for antagonists in the original Final Fantasy XIII, the arrival of Caius was a breath of fresh air. At one point during Final Fantasy XIII Part 2, Noel describes Caius as like the calm before the storm, and I think that's rather apt. Not only does he have the twisted conviction to match other legendary antagonists from the rest of the franchise, but he's also incredibly strong and carries a rather unique weapon. Oh, and his theme tune is rather incredible. To date, only Lightning has appeared from the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, and I couldn't think of anyone better to appear opposite her on the side of Spiritus. But I guess only time will tell as to whether Square Enix will agree. So far, although we've had 2 characters appear from spin-offs, there have been no characters added who first appeared within a sequel. Outside of that, I'd just love to see Caius have some kind of interaction with Cain, not because I think it would be amazing from the perspective of any kind of narrative, just because they're both voiced by the amazing Liam O'Brien and it would be rather comical. Heck, why not just throw in Red 13 too as some kind of support character, and then we'd have the complete Liam O'Brien trilogy. Third on our list is one Ardyn Izunia, who you may remember from recent times as the main antagonist of Final Fantasy 15. Now, even though the developers have given absolutely no indication whatsoever to my knowledge that Ardyn will be added into Dissidia NT, it's surely a foregone conclusion at this point, right? There are just far too many reasons why he should be added to the cast for me to think that he won't be at some point. Not only is he the most recent villain, who is still rather fresh in people's minds due to the consistency of Final Fantasy XV's updates throughout the last year, but they've also just added Noctis into the game's roster, and he is clearly Noctis' rival. There's also the fact that they will be producing a specific piece of DLC for Final Fantasy XV next year based around Ardyn, and what better way to promote that than by adding Ardyn into Dissidia NT around the same time. Now, as with Cloud and Zack, it could be argued that Ardyn's playstyle might be similar to that of Noctis, but I feel as though there should be enough uniqueness there. And if not Ardyn, who else would they realistically be able to add to Spiritus' side to square off against Noctis? Next up, we have Seymour Guado from Final Fantasy X. Now, we've spoken previously about wanting to include Seymour Guado into Dissidia NT, but I wanted to raise that topic again because it just makes so much sense to me, especially if they're going to be adding in characters from previous Dissidia games. The developers from the original game had spoken about the fact that they were torn between including Jecht or Seymour to oppose Tidus, but ultimately they went with Jecht because of the stronger connection. But when they added Yuna into Dissidia Duodecim, that changed things considerably. Why? Well, they also stated that had they chosen Yuna instead of Tidus to represent Cosmos in the original game, then they'd have gone with Seymour instead of Jecht as Chaos' representative. Now, adding in Seymour would not only mean we would potentially get to see some rather twisted battle styles, if they could somehow incorporate the different Seymour transformations, but it means we could also get to see more summons from Final Fantasy X, as they would surely have to include Anima. Another aspect of Seymour I'd just love to see in Dissidia NT is how he'd behave in the various story cutscenes. I just feel as though his interactions with the other antagonists would be absolutely priceless. Next up, we have Vivi from Final Fantasy IX. Although they brought additional characters in from Final Fantasy IV, 5, 7, 8 and 10 when Dissidia Duodecim launched, I was always a bit disappointed that we didn't see any new characters from either Final Fantasy VI or 9. Both of those games have rich, unique and rather expansive casts of characters, and honestly, any of them would be viable candidates to be included in a Dissidia roster. But I feel as though if I had to pick only one representative, then it would surely have to be Vivi. Ever since the release of Final Fantasy IX, he emerged as a popular character due to not only his rather cute appearance, but also his journey. And despite the original game releasing almost 20 years ago now, he's remained a popular character within the fanbase ever since. With there also being a resurgence in popularity around Final Fantasy IX thanks to its re-release on numerous platforms, Square Enix would surely be missing a trick if they didn't capitalize by adding another character from the game into the Dissidia NT roster. Now, I appreciate that there are a few different mages in the current cast of characters for Dissidia NT, but I feel as though his playstyle could be quite unique within the game, and if anything, it could help to add a bit more variety. Also, I'd be rather interested to see how he would interact with the other protagonists on the side of Materia, as he'd certainly be of a different type of character mold. Last on our list is Vincent Valentine. Now, I wrestled in my mind for quite a while as to who I should include as my final pick, but every single time I just ended up coming back to Vincent Valentine. Yes, I know this would mean we would have an overabundance of characters from Final Fantasy VII, as they're sure to add in Tifa, and I've also suggested that they add in Zack. But I just can't get over the fact that from a gameplay perspective, Vincent would quite possibly be the most interesting character they could add at this point. Not only would we get to see an expansion of gunplay mechanics, which to date we've only really had exposure to due to the addition of Laguna, but just think about the possibilities relating to the chaos inside of Vincent. In Final Fantasy VII, this manifested itself in the form of his limit breaks, but with Dissidia NT, I feel as though the potential here is somewhat limitless. There's just so much they could potentially do. There's also the fact that Vincent has quite an appeal in the wider sense, and given his omission from the previous 2 Dissidia games, adding him into Dissidia T just feels like the right thing to do. I mean, he did save an entire planet after all. Alright guys, so they were 6 characters who I feel as though they should add into Dissidia NT in the future. But given the sheer breadth of the franchise, I'm sure there are plenty of others you guys would like to see added too. If you had to pick 6 right now, not including characters who appeared in either of the original 2 games, who would you pick? Let us know in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, we've been mentioning it a bit, but we're going to be doing another Patreon giveaway. Why not become a supporter now and get your name entered into the draw automatically? All you have to do is head over to patreon.com/FFunion to find out more. These guys that you're seeing now have already chosen to support us and they're automatically entered too. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. I'll see you next time for more Final Fantasy videos.